Welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoye. The Psychology Talk Podcast is a unique conversation with experts in the field of mental health from around the globe. Topics include hypnosis and mind-body treatments, ethics and cultural diversity, psychotherapy and psychiatry, emerging treatment modalities, and much, much more. While you're listening, please give us a like and subscribe to the show. It helps us to continue to provide excellent programming. And now, here is the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, my guest is Dr. Karyne Messina. Dr. Messina is a psychologist and a child, adolescent, and adult psychoanalyst, in addition to maintaining a full-time private practice in Chevy Chase, Maryland. She's on the medical staff of Suburban Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland, which is part of Johns Hopkins Medicine. She is a podcast host for the New Books Network and chair of the Department of Psychoanalytic Education, Scholarship, and Writing section, which is part of the American Psychoanalytic Association. Her books include Misogyny, Projective Identification and Mentalization, Psychoanalytic, Social, and Institutional Manifestations, Aftermath, Healing from the Trump Presidency, The Resurgence of Global Populism, a psychoanalytic study of blame shifting and the corruption of democracy, and It's Not Me, It's You, How Narcissists Use Projective Identification to Get What They Want and How to Stop Them. And of course, more recently, Barbie and the Great American Identity Crisis, the unfortunate reality of a nation plagued by racism, patriarchy, and stark hypocrisy. Dr. Messina, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's always nice to talk with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what an interesting book. Very topical. I guess we can start by, why did you decide to write a book about Barbie?
Well, I saw the movie, and it struck me that Barbie, everybody knows who Barbie is, A, and B, that Barbie lost her identity. I knew a little bit about this ahead of time, but I did a lot of research on this, and there was a doll that existed in Germany that the Mattel Corporation, more or less lifted. Ruth Handler didn't actually create Barbie. She found this doll in Germany. Her name was Lily. And she brought her back. She and her daughter were the Swiss Alps. And they saw this doll. And they brought it back to the United States. And Mattel changed the doll very little. If you have pictures of them side by side, they kind of look like twins. So this whole scenario was created about Barbie, the all-American girl who had really no personality. Little girls were supposed to project their own fantasies onto this doll. Whereas this other doll already existed, and she had a very different personality. Most quickly, she was a doll made by men for men, and she was sort of a gag gift that men would give other men at bachelor parties. So she was a body call girl type doll. So it just struck me when I saw the movie that this is about identity that was taken away in a metaphor. So I thought there's so many people that lose their identities through associations with other people, or perhaps overbearing parents, or maybe they didn't form their own identity to start with. And identity is so important because it's about who we are as people. So I kind of just clicked when I think the movie.
Well, so the movie, I think the movie itself, having seen it myself and enjoyed it, I think it is about identity, how you construct it, how it's constructed by society, and how that shaped men and women, and concepts of masculinity and feminism. But it also sounds like when you saw it, that you also remembered the story about origin of the doll, it sounds like, or did you delve into it later on?
Both. I knew a little bit about it, having read about it in some magazine recently. There was so much hype about Barbie before it came out, so I read a fair amount about it, and I remembered this story, and then I thought, again, this style didn't start out as Barbie, so let me look into it more. And the more I looked into the story of Lily, I thought it was a good example of an identity being taken away. That's,
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
and someone made into someone else, and that is it's so endemic in our society. Not a story of one person and another, but if you think about social media, if a person doesn't feel too good about himself or herself, say maybe an adolescent, but they hear about that's going on with another person, they want to become like that person. So, in a way, that's a defense mechanism. That's identification, but they overdo it. They don't just, I mean, they might do it with some kind of rock star, rap, a rapper, a woman who is a really famous singer. They want to become like that person because they don't feel that they have a sense of self. I don't know that they would put it in those words, but if they can become more like somebody else, then they'll be really one of the cool kids, um,
Hmm.
one of the accepted kids. They may do it with a popular classmate too. But when you see so much on social media over and over and over again, people can form a whole, as you know, a whole scenario about their lives, and it can be based on little or no facts, but they can become they can get a lot of followers if they write the right story, but it doesn't have to do with who they really are. So
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So it's facades or masks of persona
Hmm.
rather than, yeah. Yeah,
Good
and
way
the
to put it.
movie, I think, yeah, I think a lot of it has been discussed about how the movie kind of looked at those themes to a certain degree, but it seems like there's another layer that you added to with your book.
Well, I think so. I think it also has to do with truth and honesty
Hmm.
and why people put on facades. It can be obviously to be popular, to be liked, and that's a problem if it can't accept themselves and develop or in tandem with other people become the person they want to be, but someone they think they should be, then obviously issues down the road will emerge. So it's a problem on an individual level and also with groups, because a person doesn't just have one identity. They have an identity as a member of a community group, church, mosque, synagogue, um, as I'm not sure if I get this right. Uh, Scouts of America. See, what is it? The new term for Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts.
Oh,
Uh,
yes, I'm
Scouting
not.
America.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Scouting America, or those two words are in it, but who they are in a group of other kids, who they are as a member of a choir, who they are as a member of a work group, any group,
Hmm.
how they fit in, and people tend to change based on what they think people want them to be versus being true to themselves. So there are all kinds of ways that this can manifest itself as a problem.
So, when there's too much of an identification with those, I guess you could say, false sense of self, right? Or ego states or self states,
Mhm.
rather than a cohesive identity with one's internal core concept,
Mhm.
that could become pathological or cause societal issues, I
Mhm.
would assume.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that just it reminded me when you said false. It reminds me of Winnicott, Donald Winnicott's idea of a false self.
Mhm.
And that starts pretty early when a child thinks they have to be a certain way for the approval and love of a parent, and then continues throughout life. So, in that case, somebody really does need some assistance to understand that they could be okay without the approval of other people. Uh, Everybody wants some approval, but the core of who one is, it's important to be happy with that self without
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
always seeking approval.
Well, it seems like we're kind of diving into more therapeutic terms here. So maybe we can kind of look at how you unfold in one of the chapters of the book, uh, an imaginary psychoanalysis of Barbie, and maybe you can explain why you decided to include that in the book.
Well, yes. So this is the first time I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but I kind of mixed nonfiction with fiction. And so in chapter 3, Barbie undergoes an analysis with me, and for that purpose, she becomes a real person. So it's as if there is a person who's being analyzed by me, is on my couch, so to speak. So I can illustrate the steps in analysis and how powerful and how helpful it could be. So, in this allegory, a person comes in, and of course, there are a few introductory sessions to see if it's a good fit. And then she tries to understand what's happened to her. And in this case, it's about being the German doll who's taken by Ruth Handler and made into somebody else. And by this time in this story, she's tired of it. So she wants to understand who she really is and who she wants to become. So I wanted to illustrate the importance of an identity, a true identity, and um, why it matters. And it matters because of self respect, for one thing. It's important
Mhm.
to know who you are and what you value in life and what your values are and beliefs based on your own sense of the world, not based on what's been imposed on you. Of course, we're all influenced by people, but you don't want to become a carbon copy of the person. So maybe down the road, a person has traits, some traits of a mother, some of a father, some perhaps of Uncle Charles, and maybe of Aunt Jennifer and other people you've met along the way, but you don't want to become Aunt Jennifer. You want to be yourself. And if you're a little bit quirky like she might have been, that's fine if you're comfortable with that. But who a person is as an individual is extremely important. So I wanted to illustrate that.
Okay.
I hope I did.
Uh, okay. Yeah. I mean, I think you did a really good job, and the footnotes in it were very nice to read. For those of you who haven't read it, I recommend the book. Don't want to spoil too much for you, but indeed, I found it kind of cathartic. But I'm wondering, as you were writing it, was it cathartic for you? I assume you've already been through your own analysis or therapy. You've been at this for a while. But as you were writing that, was that cathartic for you on some level?
It was very cathartic, and it was very useful to understand what actually helps a person change. I mean, you could talk to people for a long time, and they may change a little bit here and there, but fundamentally, if something is really problematic, how does a person change? And to think about the process that I went through and what I try to help people go through all the time is and was very cathartic. A couple of years, well, when I wrote my first book, I came up with this term. Nobody's ever heard of it, but it's the term that I chose was redactive identification, and basically what I'm talking about with that term is that with another person, if you go on a journey with another person, and psychoanalysis is a journey. It's a fairly well, it's a a venture that takes several years. If you're with another person who understands you, who cares about you, and who wants to listen to you and wants to help you become the person, form an identity, become the person you want to become, uh, there's a way in which that can happen. So if your early life didn't go so well, you can sort of rewrite it. You can redact part of it. You can uh, develop new ways of being in the world. I believe Consolino said that it's the way your life is now, or the essence of what he said is the way your life is now is not the way it has to end. So the current chapter doesn't have to be the last chapter or the next chapter. But I think one does need to do that with another person. So it was just going through those steps of how, and it's not A, B, C, D. It's a blending of all those things that that can help a person speak, I think, more honestly in a much more straightforward way without a fear of repercussions. So
Yeah.
it was very cathartic.
It reminds me of a quote from Gregory Bateson. It takes two to know one.
Oh, yeah, that's good. I like that. I have to remember that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so the chapter was cathartic for you, but you were kind of also putting patriarchy on the couch, right? I think to a certain extent in the whole book, right? You're kind of analyzing some of those issues or a lot of those issues that create this kind of false sense of American identity, whether it's masculine or feminine. Maybe you can kind of talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, I've done slide presentations about patriarchy. We know men and women are the same in lots of ways, and in some ways they're different. And for example, if women have something that happens to them, just say a breakup, one thing they do, and I don't mean to just put people in boxes or stereotype people, but I think many people would agree that women talk to girlfriends. They cry together. They talk about what this person did, this person they broke up with, and maybe how bad it was, and all kinds of things. But things are worked through in a process, often with friends. Now, people go to therapy, men and women go to therapy over breakups. But there's a way in which women, I think, talk among themselves with their friends. But in many ways, at least this used to be the case, but I think it is to some extent. Men don't do that. They just kind of get a stiff upper lip, and they're going to just kind of plow through it and just make whatever happen happen without really. I don't think men generally sit around and talk about a breakup with a number of guys. Now, they may, some may, but by and large, I don't think men do that. So the one thing that I thought about early on when I was not early on, but in the last few years when I was making these slide presentations is the next best thing to love is power. So I think if if a man is brokenhearted, I think it can be the case that if they can do something powerful to exert power, then there's a sense of feeling better. But it's also without taking down the layers and looking at what really happened. So I think that's a piece of the patriarchal world we still live in. If you can't have love, the next best thing is power. Maybe I'll make that
Yeah. I think you're right on the money with that. From my own experience of like in my 20s, hanging out with it would depend on who I was speaking with. Some people would actually be able to process their emotions. Typically, my friends who had been able to do that had gone through some kind of therapy or working towards being a therapist. Whereas others, I can remember, definitely trying to engage them emotionally and then the defense mechanisms come up, right? And this, kind of other sense of self takes them over, or they project it onto themselves in the world, and that's shut down. Moving on, nothing to see here. Move
Yeah.
along.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's finding a balance, I think, is really difficult for men.
Yeah.
It's very all or nothing.
Yeah. And of course, it does happen to women too, but just in terms of our society, again, I mean, women talk with each other. Um,
Yeah. What
I,
do you make of Ruth Handler, and what did she contribute, do you think, to society by uh, taking basically a kind of I guess like a bachelor party pseudo call girl doll, transforming her into a fully developed doll for girls to play with. How do you think that affected things? And it sounds like from the history report, she might have been duplicitous in what she was explaining about that. Like she might not have been the entire. I mean, she's the alleged um, developer of Barbie, right? And the movie tries to portray her as that. I think because they're using her as a kind of a maybe uh, an educational trope in the movie to explain, where she was in all of this. But I don't know. How do you like? What do you make of her and her story? And did she have a bad effect on American culture and women's values, or what's going on there?
well, the backstory isn't the same as you're suggesting.
Hmm.
There are a couple of things. Ruth Handler did want to make a doll that was a full-figured woman, and I believe she was the only executive who was a woman at Mattel at that time in the
Hmm.
50s. And the men said, no, nobody's going to buy this doll. So we're not in favor of it. We're not going to do it. So she did have the idea of wanting to make this doll. And when she went to the Swiss Alps for a vacation with her daughter, she happened to come upon this doll that was already made. So I guess it fit into her wish in a way. Um, they're very. It's interesting to look at the pictures of Lily and Barbie. They look, as I said earlier, like twins. So I guess she kind of got her wish in a way. But interestingly enough, she w- the doll premiered at the 1959 International Toy Show in New York, and she had high hopes for the doll. But Barbie didn't sell very well in the very beginning, and she didn't know why. So she hired, I believe he was from Vienna, a psychoanalyst who had some acquaintance with Freud. And he was a specialist in marketing. And he did focus groups with girls and their mothers separately, I believe separately and together. And what he found out was from mothers is what they wanted. Well, they wanted their daughters to get married. Now we're talking about the early 60s. So somehow they came to believe that if their daughters, I don't know if this man puts the idea in their heads or not, the psychoanalyst, but they came to believe that Barbie was prim and proper. And if their daughters believed that she was prim and proper and they were like her, by now she was quite fashionable, different clothes were coming out. If they could become like Barbie, they had a higher chance of, as I said, of being a prim and proper young lady and therefore could attract a man. So, in spite of these other things that Ruth Handler said, which was she wanted a little girl to become anything or anybody she wanted to be. So, that's pretty close to a quote. She also was working with this man, and they decided that what mothers needed to was to be sold on the concept or to understand that what they really wanted was their daughters to get married. So in the first commercial of Barbie on television, there is Barbie in this major fancy bridal gown, which is not the same as the picture of a little girl projecting onto Barbie and becoming anything she wanted to be. That's not how identification is formed anyway. Little girls, older girls, people have to interact with real live human beings to form an identity. So it didn't work uh, psychologically anyway. But she's got this one story of little girl wanting little girls to become anybody they want to be. But then she's working with this psychologist, psychoanalyst. I'm not sure he's a psychologist, but he was a psychoanalyst. And to kind of sell the idea that what was really important was for little girls to get married. So there definitely are two messages there. So it sounds pretty duplicitous to me. But in the end, she did make millions of dollars, and now Mattel is $1 billion corporation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but the effect on what do you think? What effect do you think Barbie's had on society, American and world society, global society?
Well, I'll take one example. It's affected young girls in terms of developing eating disorders. There have
Hmm.
been a number of studies that indicate that if girls play with Barbies, they don't want to play with other dolls afterwards. In other words, just say a bigger doll with like a regular structure where everything is proportionately correct. If they've played with Barbie first, they don't want to play with those dolls. The regular dolls will say. If they if they whether they have or if they have played with the regular dolls that are proportionally made correctly, and they move to Barbies, they don't want to go back to the other dolls. So skinny, thin is much more attractive to them. And many young women, of course, develop eating disorders. So I think there is a connection between wanting to be thin, skinny, and that being the more attractive way to navigate in the world than being like a regular size person. Actually, if Barbie were a person, Barbie wouldn't be able to walk. Barbie would be in a wheelchair. So there's another deceptive um, move on the part of Mattel. Nobody ever told anybody that. And uniformly, and of course, this isn't in every case, but children of from all backgrounds prefer the blonde, um, not the original Barbie, but a blonde Barbie, whether they're children of color or all children. They prefer the, those are the ones that are stacked on the shelves mostly. Now there are black Barbies and Barbies from various countries now, brown Barbies, all kinds of Barbies. But the one that sells the most is the blonde Barbie.
Mhm.
So that's a creation of Mattel.
Uh, yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot, there's a lot implied by that, and I know that, for instance, having having gone to India quite a bit, I know that there tends to be, my wife's Indian. I know there is a prejudice towards lighter skinned people there because of the invasion of the Mughals who kind of took over, and after that the Brits, right? And just a fascination with it. Uh, you know, more body dysmorphia and other issues based upon that. There's two skin creams in India, Fair and Lovely, Fair and Handsome, and it's supposed to lighten your skin.
Mhm.
Uh, right. So there's a lot there that you could unroll or unpack, but maybe we could. So it sounds like that. Generally speaking, Barbie's not been a very good influence on girls.
I don't think so.
Okay, yeah, for having a an actual identity of a true self or self acceptance and secure attachment, right?
Right.
Yeah, along with
Right.
other things. What about Ken though? What does it mean to be Ken off?
Well, Ken in the movie is kind of an interesting character, and um, I think there was definitely a role reversal there. So Ken is sort of um, arm candy for Barbie, the way women have been for so many years. Who've just kind of been the pretty, at least in the period of time when this was all happening originally in the late 50s and 60s and beyond, where women were an ornament. Say women in this early 60s and the 50s, they just accompanied their husbands, and the husband was the big cheese of the family. So this is a role reversal, and I think one thing that the movie illustrated, at least for me, was it's not good for either sex to dominate. That it's a blending of the two sexes that makes for I think a happier community, a happier couple relationship where there isn't a top dog and an underdog, but they're two equal dogs, so to speak.
Mhm, mhm.
Happy dogs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the movie touches upon uh, Ken learning about patriarchy and taking it back to Barbie Land and making it a Kendom, which I think
Gender.
is yeah, which is funny, of course, but
It's very funny. Yeah.
yeah, the whole film is kind of a send up of everything. I was really overwhelmed by it simply because there was so much packed into it, like allegorically, metaphorically, and just the imagery was just, it was like out of control. A lot of pink in that, a lot of pink in the palette for that
Hey,
film. So, but I think that you touched upon this whole idea of what patriarchy does to men, and that's what the film is trying to illustrate, right?
mhm.
And maybe you can touch upon that a little bit here.
Yeah, I think there was so much in it. I don't think people really, well, I think many people don't understand how it is really pretty deep. And I think that I was really disappointed that the actress and the director didn't get any kind of recognition or very little recognition at the Academy Awards, because I do think that there's much more to it than just Barbie with her flat feet and then finding herself and telling telling the world that in the end that she was going to be herself. She was going to take over. But in terms of patriarchy, I think there's a leveling out at the end of
Hmm.
the balance of power between the two sexes. At least that was maybe it was my wish. Um, Whether it was the intention, well, it might have been to some extent the intention of the creators of Barbie.
Yeah, yeah,
Really is important for there to be a balance of power, whether it's government or whether it's in a movie or whether it's in real life. Um,
yeah. Yeah, thinking about it, thinking back on the film now, and I only saw it once in the theater last year when it came out. It kind of held a lot of like it was almost more realistic than a film that was done in a realistic kind of manner in a lot of ways.
yeah.
It was because it was kind of like a Fellini film, and I think that Fellini's version of surrealism is a lot more attuned to how people experience reality than how it actually plays out in three-dimensional space, so to speak. It's not trying to tell a story as if it's out there, but it's what's going on in the character's head, for better or for worse, in a way. And it was kind of like, obviously this was a lot, Greta Gerwig She took a movie that could have been a dumb movie about a toy, or,
Mhm.
a child's movie, a children's movie about a toy, and turned it into so much more, which is really creative. Yeah.
Yeah, very creative. And then there's Weird Barbie, and
Yeah.
so many patients and some friends have said, I had a weird Barbie that I didn't want to play with. I had a favorite one. Um, Quite frequently was the blonde Barbie, but one of my friends told me after I saw the movie, she said, "Yeah, it really Weird Barbie reminded me of what I did with some of my Barbies." I think she gave it haircuts or something, but there were favorites and there were ones that weren't so favorite.
Yeah, I think Frank Zappa in his autobiography describes his youngest daughter at the time, and he really praised her for taking some rubber cement and smearing it all over her Barbie and renaming her Snot Woman. And I think that's kind of in line with that. I think there might be something, little girls might be onto something there.
Yeah,
They might
I think
kind of
so.
know. Yeah, they
Yeah.
might know what's going on, and maybe how things are kind of rigged rigged for them in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Um, well, there's another couple chapters in the book too where you describe kind of ways out, if you will. Like yeah, I mean, your book is possibly as complicated as the Barbie movie itself that it's kind of branching off from, and one of the chapters talks about like corrective measures. Maybe you can kind of go into that.
Well, I'm not exactly sure which chapter you're talking about, but uh, Barbie in chapter 4, after her analysis. So now we're back in a little bit of touch of fantasy, but she becomes an environmentalist, gets a master's degree, gets married, and she becomes an activist for climate change. And because she's so well known around the world, being Barbie, um, she's quite effective. So chapter 4 is really about the environment, and that's all based on truth about global warming. I've
Mhm.
done a lot of research on that and things that are happening to the planet, but also what's happening to people as a result. For example, eco anxiety, eco grief, and how important it is to really process what's happening to the environment. Um, if if there is, say, a butterfly that's extinct now and something that you'll never see again, or it could be any other species, there's a real loss there. And it's important for people to be able to process that loss, as you can always do things for the environment that are better, that can help. But it's also important to process what can't be anymore, like you process any kind of loss. And I find that my patients are talking about those kinds of things a lot more than they did just a few years ago. I was involved at this conference in 2021, and it was about the existential threat to our society, or something of that sort. And it was there were various types of people who attended the conference, but there were a lot of therapists, and they were saying at that time patients were starting to talk about the environment, but they weren't talking about it too much. But I think that's really changed a lot. I think people are talking about they're worried. There were worries about it. In fact, I think that there was a large study in the UK not too long ago where children were surveyed, and a lot of children said they didn't want to have children themselves because they didn't know what was going to happen to the world, and it's something that they were really taking very seriously. And you don't necessarily think that 12-year-olds are thinking about that, but they are. And of course, they're learning more about that in school. So it's much more front and center than it used to be.
Well, I think that a couple of ideas. come to mind as we're discussing this. Yes, I would concur. More and more people are thinking about systems. They're thinking about themselves, how the environment is impacting them, and how politics is impacting them. I think that is becoming front and center as a topic in the consulting room, and I think that psychotherapy has to evolve to address that uh, in a way where I think that if psychotherapy is to do that, it has to do something with identity formation, right?
Mhm.
How do you, and maybe the task of intimacy or connection to groups or individuals. Uh, because the reason we've gotten here, I think, is that a transactional relationships with people create a transactional relationship to the world, to the environment, and we're not separate from it. We just see it as an other out there that we can affect, we can use for resources, eat it up, consume it, crap it out, toss it away when we're done with it, right? Which is, consumer society is kind of the apotheosis of that transactional relationship gone wild, right?
Yeah.
If I look back to the census for my family in Akron, Ohio in 1860, there's some people from Ireland. It's my great 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 grandfather from around Dublin. His kids, some of them were born there. The older generation is there's generations. There's three generations in the house, and if I look at the 1820 census in Detroit later, they're all all the men are cops now, right? They're no longer listed as shepherds, but they're cops.
Yeah.
And there's three generations there. But then what happened between 1920 and when the family started spreading out so that they were being sold the bill of goods that they had to have a house, an extension of 40 acres and a mule to keep the economy going.
Yeah.
And I think that people have to develop for themselves in society. It's difficult because I think that most monolithic societies function best when you have a hierarchical system that creates division, right? That can make us all consume just so that people on top, the shareholders, the top 1% can keep making more money. But
Mhm.
that's gonna fall apart eventually.
Yeah, that's true. It's going to fall apart. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Uh,
sort of the idea of neoliberalism and why deregulation of various things that Reagan and Thatcher kind of put into place sort of made the rich get richer and the poor become more poor. And that system is pretty much stayed in place.
well, I think it's run rampant, and now it's our current robber barons are Silicon Valley people,
Yeah.
and to a large degree, not everybody, and they're not. I don't think anybody's intentionally like
Yeah.
trying to be a robber baron. Maybe some people, but I just think it's the way the system is set up and how to systemic change is important.
It's absolutely important.
Yeah.
How do you get there?
Well, the
That's
last chapter in your book does talk about some of those. It gives some examples about that. Maybe you can kind of address what your suggestions are.
well, I think where people have been successful, um, I think that there was some success in South Africa in coming together after the apartheid,
Mhm.
by the Truth and Reconciliation um, Commission. Uh, it's not perfect. Nothing is ever perfect, but when two warring groups, so to speak, or people definitely on different sides of the fence can come together and talk about their problems, and it's sort of the foundation for mentalization, where you have an idea, I have an idea. You're not going to try to talk me out of my thoughts, and I'm not going to try to talk you out of yours, but we can voice our opinions in an atmosphere of respect. And when you can do that, then there's a possibility that change can happen. I think probably the most powerful story I know about is what happened in Rwanda after the genocide of 1994. when the Hutus and the Tutsis wiped each other out. And actually, I was thinking of this earlier when I was talking about women getting together and talking versus men doing more patriarchal, or in this case, warlike things. Not warlike, they killed each other. So, but the women got together and they said, we can be enemies for the next 300 years, or we can do something to bring the country together. And they actually they got together and in groups, and they made products that were from their country, and they sold them around the world. And that was one thing that helped pull them together. But also, they had, for people who had murdered other people, they had people's courts, and the people were actually tried in a court of their peers, and not as our system is set up, but I believe some of them are outside. And what it took for somebody to be able to be accepted into the society was to admit they did it. It wasn't that they had to say they were sorry. They had to, I mean, that probably helped, but they had to admit that they had committed this crime. And it was pretty heinous. 800,000 people were killed in 100 days. So there's something similar going on today. And in the Rwandan situation, the world watched. They didn't intervene. Now, it's people, I think, get stunned. They don't know what to do, but what they do is often nothing. So it doesn't help the people who are victims in this together, this terrible genocide together. So, but they were able, these people were able to talk about what had happened, and they actually borrowed South African Truth and Reconciliation Council's format, and they used that. And again, I don't think things are perfect in Rwanda, but people are living together side by side, and they're continuing to expand the national. They're living and working together, and doing a lot of things for the good of the country.
And it sounds like more of a balance between, I guess, feminine and masculine traits kind of help to develop that sense of mentalizing in a political structure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's an example of a movement in the United States that reminds me of this. It's the Braver Angels. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I think you've
Bill
mentioned
Broward,
it in prior conversations. Yeah.
I think I did. Bill Dougherty, and he was a co-founder. And this was after the 2016 election, where he saw, and this other person saw, that there was a divide in America that was forming, or had already formed. Well, it's now the divide is massive, as we know. But these groups are very impressive when they have Braver Angels meetings, because red state and blue state people are invited to participate in the same conversation, and they list what they think is a problem with the other side and what's good about their own views. And they talk about them. And there aren't huge fights, there aren't huge arguments. They're able to have discussions that are reasonable. Does a blue state person walk away from these becoming a red state person? I don't think so. But again, it's back to mentalizing, just being able to talk in an atmosphere of respect.
Mm-hmm.
That can lead to living together with different ideas.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 Well, we need more of that and less compartmentalization, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, have you, I think you mentioned to me sometime before we got on the call today that your book on Barbie was #1 on Amazon?
It was for a while. It changes really quickly. This is a Kindle, the Kindle version, but for days it was the top best selling Kindle version.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Uh,
Wow. Excellent. Well, that must be pretty gratifying knowing that people are reading. Have people reached out to you since reading and publishing this, since they've read it after you published it?
yeah, people have reached out and talked about it, and yeah.
I wonder, has Greta Gerwig contacted you about it?
Not as part.
Well, I mean, I wonder if she's read it or if anybody's pointed it out to her. She's probably on some other project now, but it'd be
Probably.
interesting because, I mean, the movie is such a good jumping off point for ideas.
Yeah, that's definitely.
And your book is too, very thought provoking. I recommend it to anybody in the audience who is interested in any of the ideas we talked about today or wants to learn more about them. If they feel like they're babes in the woods, so to speak, with regards to looking at political and gender issues. The book is Barbie and the Great American Identity Crisis, the unfortunate reality of a nation plagued by racism, patriarchy, and stark hypocrisy. And you can get that on Amazon if you're so inclined to. Thank you so much, Dr. Messina. Do you have anything else coming up?
I do have a couple of books coming up. Well, one is a psychoanalytic study of political leadership in the United States and Russia,
Mm-hmm.
and that will be available on Monday.
Oh,
And
wow.
and also, I'm really quite concerned, as are many people, about the state of our democracy. So I'm publishing something rather quickly. I hope it's out at the end of July or the beginning of August. And so far, this is a working title: Things You Can Do to Help Save Democracy Now, a 60-day plan and a long-term strategy to strengthen our democratic way of life. And it's actual ideas of something someone can do. They don't have to do it every day, but something people can do in a tangible way. I mean, like getting together with a community group and talking about ideas, and then getting people to vote. I actually got the idea from a friend of mine who wrote a book recently. Her name is Heather White, and the book is about the environment. It's 60 Days to a Greener Life.
Mm.
And, she's got very good ideas. We talked about the title. I told her I didn't want to take her ideas, and she said, please use it, because we need to work on democracy and a greener world. So we need both.
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand. Well, thank you so much. You're welcome to come back anytime. Always
Thank
a pleasure
you.
to talk with you.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Did you know the Psychology Talk podcast is all over the World Wide Web? Well, not entirely all over, but we are in social media and we do have a website. Pop over to www.psych-talk.com to find out more about the show. All material is copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. Opinions of our guests are not necessarily those of the host or the show. Material is provided for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.